Hi, my name is Philip, and welcome to this analysis of X-Men Apocalypse. I loved this movie. I loved it the first time, and I loved it even more the next 4 times I watched it. I tried to analyze every single scene, every detail in this movie, and there is much more to this movie that you are aware of. Every single scene in this movie has a connection to one of the other X-Men movies. Sometimes it's Easter eggs, sometimes the structure of the scene is very similar to the structure in a scene in one of the other movies. And sometimes they almost repeat identically what the character said before in one of the other movies. And even though Days of Future Past changed the timeline, it still tries to integrate the other movies. And in the movie Days of the Future Past, Hank McCoy actually says that maybe the timeline always corrects itself. So it does make sense that X-Men Apocalypse still tries to connect the first trilogy and the new trilogy. If you look at X-Men Apocalypse superficially, you might think that the story is very simple. There is a bad guy and the good guys are fighting against him. But there is so much more to it. There are a lot of themes going through the movie and going through the whole X-Men franchise. The way the movie is edited is slightly unusual, and it might come across as disjointed, but it's not. Every scene is connected to scenes you've seen before, sometimes even just through little details. And I will try to mention all of these details in this analysis. But the most important thing about this movie are the personal themes. And the biggest themes in the movies are family, working together, friendship, and the most important thing in the whole movie is one that Charles stands for, and that is hope. Now please enjoy this analysis and leave comments below if you liked it and if you think that something was missing. Thanks and enjoy watching. Like every X-Men movie, this movie starts with an intro by Professor Xavier talking about mutants, and this intro is when he says a gift can often be a curse, that's actually a lesson that Professor Xavier himself just learned in the last movie, Days of the Future Past. He actually suppressed his abilities with a drug to get rid of his ability to read minds because he couldn't bear the pain in other people. In this movie, quite a few mutants have to learn the same lesson. Cyclops, who can't control his powers at all, Jean Grey, who's afraid of the power that lives within her, Mystique, who is afraid of showing her own true self because people know who she is, and then Magneto, who can't live a normal life because of the powers he has. When Charles says, They are children stumbling in the dark, searching for guidance. That is almost exactly the same thing that Apocalypse says later on in the movie when he says, "You are all my children, and you're lost because you follow blind leaders." So Charles and Apocalypse actually believe in the same thing, but obviously they both believe that they are the right leaders and not the other one. Now we witness a ceremony in ancient Egypt, and in the middle of the ceremony there are the four horsemen wearing Egyptian masks, and in the middle a funerary boat with Apocalypse on top of it. The funerary boat is used in Egyptian funerals for pharaohs, so Apocalypse is the pharaoh of this time. The horsemen wear the masks of the following Egyptian gods: Seth, the god of chaos; Anubis, the god of the dead; Horus, the god of the sky and protector of the ruler of Egypt, which would be Apocalypse; Sekhmet, the god of war. Apocalypse himself is wearing the mask of Ra, the god of the sun and the creator of life. He is also the highest god amongst the Egyptian gods. The symbol of Apocalypse that we see on the pyramid is the Ankh, and the Ankh is the sign of life and everlasting life. I'm really excited because I finally found information about a symbol that I saw on the pyramid. The symbol is called Metatron's cube. It looks like the Star of David, but it also has circles in it. Metatron's cube is also called the fruit of life. So it works quite well together with the Ankh, which is the key of life and immortality. Metatron's cube is obviously connected to Metatron, which is an archangel who is mentioned in the Judaic belief, in Islam, and in Christianity. He is called the script of God. In Egyptian times, the scribe of God was called Thoth. Later on, he was called Hermes, but it's all pretty much the same entity. In front of the pyramid there are more symbols of the god Ra, who represents the sun, and the technology that is used in the pyramid is powered by the sun as well. All the people are chanting Ensaba Nur, which is the name of Apocalypse, and it's obvious that to them he is the pharaoh and at the same time God. During the ritual inside of the pyramid, we see a couple of interesting things. First of all, the mutant played by Oscar Isaac has the ability to heal just like Wolverine can heal. The horseman Death has the same powers that Jean Grey has, and she can also manipulate fire just like Pyro was able to control fire. And then there is another mutant who has superhuman strength, just like Colossus. In the scene, it isn't explained where the technology comes from that Apocalypse uses. In the comic books, this is actually celestial technology. The Celestials were mentioned in the movie Guardians of the Galaxy. Unfortunately, because the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Fox Cinematic Universe are not one and the same, so they can't actually mention that this is alien technology from the Celestials. It seems that Apocalypse needs this technology to actually transfer his conscience into a new body. That means that he has found this technology in the very first life he lived on this earth. But maybe transferring his conscience into another being is his first mutant power, the mutant power he was born with, and he only needs the technology to amplify this. As I said, it's not being explained in the movie, but both theories are quite interesting. When you watch the movie, have a close look at the symbols and the lines on the alien technology, because you will see the same lines in a different scene in the movie as well, which is quite interesting. And now Apocalypse is being betrayed for the very first time in this movie, and he is being betrayed by the humans, not by his horsemen. The horsemen are loyal into their death. Even when they die, they still protect Apocalypse. And that is very important, because later on in the movie, obviously, his new horsemen, they all betray him, and it's very difficult for him to understand why they do that. Mystique wears almost the exact same clothes she is wearing in the movie X2 when she seduces Magneto's guard. Her dress imitates her scale-like skin when she's in her real mutant form. The whole cage fight is obviously a nod to the movie X-Men when we are introduced to Wolverine in a cage fight. The audience in this club is predominantly normal people, but there are a lot of people from the Russian military, and that is quite important, because it means that these fights are sanctioned by the Russians, and it would be impossible to get mutants from the west of Germany, like Nightcrawler, into the east without the knowledge of the Russians. The announcer makes three important points. He calls Angel Angel of Death, which obviously is a foreshadowing of him becoming one of the horsemen. He also says that there are 10 fights this night. It means there are another 8 mutants that Angel has been fighting against. Where do they all come from, and why does Mystique only save Nightcrawler? Does she know that he is her son? But the announcer also says that Nightcrawler is from a circus in Munich. And in the movie X2, we see posters on the wall in Nightcrawler's room that show the circus. Angel doesn't really want to fight in these cage fights. He does it because otherwise he would be killed. But he still enjoys fighting. I don't think that this is actually Warren Worthington that we know from the movie X-Men: The Last Stand. Obviously, it wouldn't match the timeline, and also his wings are different, they have claws. So I think this is actually a different mutant with similar powers. Raven overloads the power grid, and that's why Angel loses his wings. In the comic books, Angel loses his wings in the Morlock tunnels, which leads him to a deep depression, and that's why he becomes one of Apocalypse's horsemen. When Nightcrawler realizes that his savior can change his appearance, he immediately knows that it's Mystique, and he says, "You are her." So she is well known all over the world, and maybe there are even rumors about her saving mutants. Eric lives in Pruszków in Poland now. And Pruszków had a very, very large Jewish community before the Second World War, before the Nazis invaded, put all of them into a ghetto and finally into concentration camps. So it's quite possible that Magneto's family is from Pruszków, and that he returned to where he was born and where he had the only happy time in his life before his family was taken from him. And now he found happiness again with a new family. And in the comic books, Eric does have a family, a wife and a daughter, and they both are being killed by an angry mob of humans. The fact that Magneto works in a steel factory makes totally sense, so he can still work with metal. But am I the only one who realized that some of these workers are very muscular? And that kind of reminded me of the video Express Yourself by the artist Madonna, which also takes place in a steel factory. There is a poster on the wall behind Scott that shows the pyramids in ancient Egypt. which obviously is a nod to Apocalypse. The teacher is talking about what happened 10 years ago when Mystique saved Nixon from Magneto. And she says that since then, humans and mutants live peaceful together, but there are still tensions and prejudice. When Scott says that the quarterback looks old enough to be his girlfriend's father, that is a very typical scene from an 80s coming-of-age movie, but it's also a nod to the fact that all these quarterbacks in the movies were always cast with actors that were far older than the role they were playing. The teacher's reaction to Scott disturbing class shows that he's a difficult pupil, he's a bit of a rebel, not the Boy Scout that he is in the first 3 X-Men movies. When the laser beams come out of Scott's eyes, this scene reminds me a little bit of the scene when Rogue shows her powers for the first time in X-Men. Both are very scared of their powers, they can't control them and freak out about it. At home, Alex, Scott's brother, talks to their parents, and they also mention that he's a difficult child. But Alex also says, "I think we're more alike than we thought," which is a nod to the fact that they are both mutants. The burqa that Moira is wearing in this scene makes her look like the mutant Dusk, who is a Muslim and she can control sand. Later on we see Apocalypse is able to control sand, and these two things I'm pretty sure are a nod to the mutant Dusk. When Moira takes off the burqa, the clothes that she is wearing look very similar to what Indiana Jones is wearing, and the whole scene feels like an Indiana Jones movie. The followers of Apocalypse wear a tattoo on their neck, which is the sign of Apocalypse. It's quite funny that Moira wakes up Apocalypse without even being aware of it. The earthquake that is being created by Apocalypse teleporting for the first time is not a real earthquake because you feel it in the same intensity all over the globe, and it's more some kind of a foreshadowing of what's to come, of the impact that Apocalypse is going to have on the whole world. And it's interesting that this earthquake affects so many of the characters in the movie at the same time. Apocalypse is only awake for a couple of seconds, and even unintentionally, he already destroys Eric's life and leads him on a darker path. In the school, all the pupils think that this earthquake was actually caused by Jean, so it seems that she's been having nightmares quite often, and she causes a lot of little earthquakes in the school, which is quite frightening. Jean's nightmare scene is very similar to the nightmare that Wolverine has the first night he spends in the mansion. And the scene also reflects the fact that in the movies X2 and X-Men The Last Stand, Jean couldn't control her powers anymore, and Cyclops even says, a couple of weeks ago you had to concentrate to move something, and now every time you have a nightmare the whole bedroom shakes. The reason why her powers are much stronger at this young age is because in this timeline Charles didn't install mental blocks into her brain to suppress the Phoenix power. Jean's vision of destruction all have to do with flames. So I think the destruction that she sees isn't actually the destruction that will be caused by Apocalypse, it's the destruction that will be caused by herself, by the Phoenix power. If you take a real close look, then you can actually see that the pillow Jean is sleeping on shows people riding on horses, so she is actually sleeping on horsemen. When Jean wakes up and she talks to Charles, she is mentioning a dark power that is growing inside of her, and that obviously is the Dark Phoenix. But Charles says that one day she won't have to be afraid of her powers anymore, and she says she can't bear all this pain that she feels from other people, and she says that Charles can't understand that, but he says, I've been through exactly the same. It's difficult to deal with all the pain, all the suffering. That is a direct quote from Days of Future Past. Hank and Charles use Cerebro to find the cause of the earthquake, and what they find is Moira. And Charles says that Moira hasn't aged a day, which is a little joke about the fact that the movie First Class is supposed to play in the 60s. This movie is taking place in the 80s, so 20 years have passed, but the actress obviously still looks pretty much the same way she looked in the first movie. But now take a very close look at the new Cerebro helmet, and you will see that it has very similar symbols as the alien technology that Apocalypse uses. And I'm not saying that there is a direct connection between the technology of Apocalypse and Cerebro, but both of these machines are amplifiers of their powers, and I think it just means that Apocalypse and Charles are two sides of the same coin. Now Charles sees Moira for the first time in a very long time, and he says she looks great, she looks as if she hasn't aged a day. And that is an inside joke about the fact that all the actors that we've seen in First Class and Days of the Future Past, obviously 20 years have passed, but they still look pretty much the same way they looked in First Class. And now please take a very close look at the helmet from Cerebro, and you will see symbols on the helmet that glow, and they are almost exactly the same ones that we see on the alien technology from Apocalypse. So what does that mean? Does it mean that Cerebro uses alien technology as well? I don't think so. I think it only means that Apocalypse and Charles, they are two sides of the same coin. Charles is the good and Apocalypse is the bad. And both of their machines, Cerebro and the alien technology, they are amplifiers that just increase their power. Magneto wants to run away with his family. Thus proves that he wants to live a peaceful life. He's not looking for conflict. But it's too late. His daughter is already in the hands of the police. And that is historically inaccurate, because at this time in Poland there wasn't a proper police. There was a militia. But the way that the police reacts to him is completely understandable, because he is the most wanted man on the planet. And they do like him, but they don't know if they can trust him. When they take him away from his family, that's exactly what Eric promised his daughter would not happen. And when she reaches out for her father and uses her power, that's exactly what happened when Eric was in Auschwitz. His family was taken away from him, and he was reaching out for her mother and using his power. When Eric kills the policemen, slicing their throats, he doesn't look at them, he doesn't take any joy in killing them, but he does it because he feels this is the only way. He can't control his rage at all. And in a couple of moments we see Apocalypse doing the same way, but without any rage. He does it because he doesn't care about people. And it almost feels as if Apocalypse is a future version of Magneto, like the most negative possible version of Eric. The way that Apocalypse is dressed in this scene makes him look like the Emperor from Star Wars. And that would be one of two nods to the Star Wars trilogy in this movie. He touches an angel, and this might be a nod to the fact that Angel will be one of his 4 horsemen. But we also see that he can learn just by touching things. And he looks at the drivers in the car with disgust. And I think what he learns from touching this Rolls Royce is there is money, and there is a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and there are things like corruption. And then he sees Storm, the first mutant he sees after he woke up. Apocalypse follows Storm into a small street, and there he sees that Storm is being threatened because she stole something. And that is very accurate from the comic books. Storm was an orphan and a thief in the streets of Cairo. Now, Apocalypse saves her life pretty much by killing the people that threatened her. He does that by slicing their throats just like Magneto killed the policeman. He uses sand. I don't think that Apocalypse can manipulate living matter. He can only manipulate stones and rocks and sand. And now a man is being sucked into a wall. And as Apocalypse does that, he asks him, Charles has erased Moira's memory in X-Men First Class, but he has only erased certain bits of her memory. So I think he actually went back after what happens in First Class and erased all of her memory of him and the other mutants. And I'm pretty sure he did the same thing to her colleagues, because that would be the only way that Moira could have a normal life with a family and keep her job, because she kind of screwed it up in X-Men First Class. And Charles himself, he sacrificed his happiness, his chance to have a relationship with Moira so he could build the school and help other mutants. When Charles freezes everybody in the FBI, that obviously is a nod to all the times he has done this before in other movies. Moira tells us everything we need to know about Apocalypse. She says that people see him as a second coming. And the second coming is a sign of the apocalypse. And in the Bible it says that with the second coming there will be false prophets that pretend to be God. And that's exactly what Apocalypse does. And she also mentions a cult that call themselves Ashir and Sabanur. And Sabanur means the first one and is Apocalypse's real name. But what does Ashir mean? Ashir is the highest god of the Assyrians. Assyria was a region, a kingdom that stretched from Sumer and Babylon up to Egypt. And Assyria is called the cradle of civilization. And later on in the movie, Apocalypse says that he was there to spark civilization. So it's obvious that he lived in Assyria. And Assyria dates back 4,500 years before our time. And Apocalypse obviously inspired parts of the Bible, and I'm pretty sure he also inspired other religious books. All the destruction we see through God in the Old Testament could be destruction that actually Apocalypse caused. But Moira also says that Apocalypse might be tens of thousands of years old, and Apocalypse himself claims that he had 1,000 lifetimes, which means he might be much older than we think he is. On Moira's table there are two photos, and on one photo it says Assyrian, and on the other one it's Babylonian. So she is traveling to all these sites all over the world, trying to figure out what Apocalypse is all about. Alex mentions that the common theory is that mutants only appeared in our century. And that is a theory that Sebastian Shaw had in X-Men the First Class. He thought that mutants are the children of the atom, and the mutation was sparked because of nuclear radiation. Storm takes Apocalypse home to where she lives with all the other orphans. And there is a poster on the wall of Mystique. Unfortunately, I can't read Arabic, so if somebody knows what it actually says on the poster, please let me know and write it down in the comments below. But it goes to show how important Mystique was for all the mutants, and it also shows that Storm wants to be a hero. She wants to do good things. She doesn't want to be destructive. In the background there is a television, and on the television there is a show from Star Trek, and the episode is called Who Mourns for Adonais? And it's about a godlike person who can change his size. And changing his size is one of the powers that Apocalypse has in the comic books, so that is obviously a nod to him. Apocalypse touches the television and learns everything he needs to know about the world, but all he sees on television is corruption and money and the superpowers fighting against each other and the Cold War. And he's disgusted by what he sees, and he feels that he needs to change this. Remember, when he was still alive, Apocalypse didn't even know money. There was no such thing as democracy. He feels the need to change all of this. When he enhances Storm's powers, she gets the white mohawk that is so typical for how she looked in the 80s in the comic books. But Apocalypse knows that Storm is a good person, so in order for her to help him, he actually lies to her. He says, I want to heal this world. But before that, he uses the old Egyptian language, and he says he wants to clean the earth. He wants to cleanse it. Now Mystique takes Kurt to the Morlocks. The Morlocks are a mutant underground society. And in the comic books, they live under the streets of New York City. But in this movie, it's not clear if we are still in Europe or if we are already in America. There's a little bit of a plot hole how they got there. The leader of the Morlocks in this movie is a guy called Caliban. And Caliban has the power to detect other mutants, and he knows what kind of mutant powers they have. Caliban here is some kind of a pimp or a broker. He deals with money, and it almost seems as if he's dealing with mutants. Mystique wants a passport for Nightcrawler so he can go wherever he wants to. And when they take a picture of Nightcrawler, he stands in front of a wall with an X behind him, and that obviously is a nod to the fact that he's gonna be an X-Man soon. Mystique reacts really angry when Caliban calls her Mystique. She doesn't want to be recognized. She doesn't want people to know that she still helps mutant and who she is, because she doesn't want to be the poster girl of the whole mutant movement. In the background we see Psylocke. And Psylocke was already part of the Morlocks in the movie X-Men The Last Stand. Here she is Caliban's bodyguard, and she does a good job, but it doesn't seem as if she really lives up to her full potential. In the comic books, most of the Morlocks, they look very strange and they don't look like humans, so they have to hide in the tunnels under New York. Here, most of the Morlocks look rather normal, but they look like people from the 80s who are into wave and gothic music, and some of them look a little bit like Brian Eno. When Mystique learns that Eric is in trouble, we also learn that Mystique doesn't have any friends anymore. So it seems that she's completely isolated. She only helps mutants and then she disappears again. And she asks Kurt how far he can teleport. He says, as far as I can see, or to places that I've seen before. That's why I think they already are in America. Because their next stop is the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. Unlike his brother Alex in the movie First Class, Scott is very thankful that Hank is helping him to control his powers. And then Scott sees Jean for the first time. And when he approaches her, he hears other students whisper "freak." And he thinks they're talking about him, but they're actually talking about Jean because she can't control her powers either. That scene is a bit similar to the scene in the movie X-Men, when people talk bad about Rogue because she sucked out Wolverine's life energy. The fact that they both can't control their powers also means they have something in common that connects them even more. When Raven and Hank meet for the first time in 10 years, you can feel that there is some emotional discomfort between the two of them because Hank is still in love with her. And it's interesting that both of them are not in their normal form, in their blue appearance. Nightcrawler makes a little joke and says, "I'm blue," which is a hint to the fact that Nightcrawler might be Mystique's son. It's clear why Apocalypse is looking for Caliban, because he can detect all other mutants and he's looking for the most powerful ones. But how did Apocalypse actually find Caliban? How did he know about him? Did he see something about him on television? That is very unclear, and it's a bit of a plot hole again. But it's really nice how Caliban and Apocalypse interact. Caliban wants money, but Apocalypse doesn't even understand the concept of money, and he thinks everybody has to help him because he's practically God. And when Apocalypse says, "You're all my children," Caliban responds, "You don't look like Caliban's father." And it's a funny little comment to the fact that Apocalypse always refers to everybody as his children. And to be honest, I think he does care about his children, but in a very archaic way. He comes from a time where there was absolute patriarchy, and he is the patriarch of all humankind and mutantkind. Even though Caliban threatens Apocalypse, Apocalypse doesn't hurt him, because he's so superior he doesn't even feel threatened, and he doesn't hurt his own kind if he can avoid it. But then Psylocke steps in and protects Caliban. And it seems that Apocalypse can actually sense the needs in people, and he feels that Psylocke wants to fight and that she wants to be a real warrior and not just somebody's bodyguard. And he taps into that, he gives her power, and he gives her a purpose to fight for. And then she says she knows where to find powerful mutants, and she is talking about Angel. In the comic books, Angel or Archangel and Psylocke had a relationship. And in this movie, you can also see that they had something going on before. I wonder if Caliban actually sells mutants to the stage fight clubs. It would make sense because he is so greedy. Now we see Scott leading people for the first time. He tells the other students to skip school and go to the mall. And Kurt doesn't even know what a mall is because back in the 80s, the cultural difference between Germany and America was still quite severe. And we are being introduced to Jubilee, and she wears her iconic outfit. Unfortunately, we don't see more of her because the mall scene was cut from the movie. In the end of the scene, Scott steals a car and in the movie X-Men, Wolverine steals a motorcycle from Scott. I call that something like instant karma. Angel is sitting in the attic of a building listening to Metallica's The Four Horsemen. It's a very similar scene to how we are introduced to Nightcrawler in X2, when he's sitting in the attic of a church. And when Jean Grey and Storm approach Nightcrawler, Nightcrawler tells them to go away and leave him alone, and Angel tells Apocalypse to piss off. Angel is drunk and he's angry and he wears a leather outfit. He's kind of a metalhead. And he's very depressed because he lost one of his wings. It's a very similar situation to what happened in the comics to Angel and Apocalypse. As soon as Psylocke sees that Angel lost his wings, she loses every interest in him. She's really just attracted to powerful, strong warriors, and she says, oh, he's not fit to fight anymore, let's go. But Apocalypse sees potential in him, and he sees how depressed he is, so it's easy for him to tap into this hate. The transformation scene is actually inspired by the movie An American Werewolf in London by John Landis, and this is another iconic movie from the 80s. The metal wings that Angel gets are almost the exact wings that he has in the comic books, and he can even projectile the wings as knives. When Eric talks to his co-workers, he actually speaks in English, not in Polish as before. And the reason for that is because he's not playing a role anymore. Now he's Eric, now he's Magneto. When he turns around and sees Apocalypse, he says, "Who the fuck are you?" And that is very similar to how Wolverine reacted when he saw Charles Xavier and Eric in X-Men First Class, and he said, fuck off. Eric says, don't try to stop me from killing these people, and without even thinking about it, Apocalypse wipes them out, and it goes to show you that he has no respect for life at all. To him, these are just ants. And he actually says, I didn't come here for them, I came here for you. And when he stands in front of Eric, the way they look at each other is very similar to how young Charles Xavier and old Charles Xavier look at each other in Days of the Future Past. I really think that that goes to show you that Magneto and Apocalypse are almost the same character, but Apocalypse is the worst possible version of Eric. And the way that Apocalypse looks at Eric is almost in an erotic, sensual way, and I think Apocalypse is attracted to the power that is in Eric. He is attracted to his potential. And when Apocalypse is about to open his teleportation sphere, he just says to Eric, come and see, just as if he wanted to show Eric his future. And there is a very interesting thing. Come and See is actually the title of a Soviet war drama from '85. And the movie is about a man who loses his family to the Nazis in the Second World War, and he's looking for revenge. So that is practically the story of Eric's life. Now we go to the concentration camp in Auschwitz, and we've seen this concentration camp twice before in the movie X-Men and X-Men First Class, and we had a concentration camp-like situation in the dystopian future of Days of the Future Past. Eric tells Apocalypse, you shouldn't have brought me here, because this is the darkest part of his life. This is where all his anger and pain comes from. But Apocalypse says, you can't escape it. So Apocalypse actually says, this is your destiny. And Eric asks him, who are you? And Apocalypse answered, Ra, the god of sun. And then he says, Elohim. And Elohim means God and deity. in Hebrew. And that goes back to Babylonian times, which connects the fact that he is from Assyria. And then he mentions a third name, and the third name I think was Shem, and Shem is the son of Noah. And Shem, the tale says that Shem was 600 years old, and that sounds a lot like somebody like Apocalypse. And the fact that Apocalypse says that one of his names was Elohim is important because Eric is Jewish, so he would think he is the god I read about when I was a kid. And then Apocalypse goes on to say, I am born of death. Jesus is called the firstborn from the dead, and Apocalypse calls himself born of death. And then Apocalypse goes on to say, I was there to spark and fan the flame of man's awakening, to spin the wheel of civilization. And that again goes back to Assyrian times, and Assyria is called cradle of civilization. And then he says, and when the forest would grow rank and needed clearing for new growth, I was there to set it ablaze. So he doesn't lie. He says that he means destruction, but he means destruction for a good reason. He wants to create a better world. And when Eric asks him, well, where were you when my family was killed? He says, oh, I was asleep. I was betrayed. I wasn't there for you then, but I am here for you now. So he plays with him because obviously Apocalypse doesn't care about Eric's family at all. He just manipulates him. And when Eric destroys the concentration camp in Auschwitz, that really means he's destroying everything that humans did to him. So that is a start of clearing the world. That's why Apocalypse is able to convince him to use his power on a global scale, because he thinks all he does is wipe out everything that he hates. And in the scene we also see the metal gate that he actually manipulated when his powers first appeared in X-Men and X-Men First Class. It is clear that Peter's mother doesn't have a very high opinion of her ex-lover Eric, and she warns Peter that he is a dangerous man. In the comic books, Quicksilver's mother, she's a gypsy, and from the looks that she has in the movie, it is quite possible that they stuck to this origin and that she actually is a gypsy. Now, this is obviously the second reference to the Star Wars trilogy, and it's also a little mean nod to the fact that X-Men The Last Stand wasn't a very good movie, but unfortunately a lot of people think that X-Men Apocalypse, the third one out of this trilogy, is also the weakest one. When they arrive at the mansion, Moira seems to remember the mansion, obviously because she has been there before, but it was wiped out of her memory. Once they go into Charles's office, Charles is very surprised to see Raven because he hasn't seen her in 10 years. Raven is very surprised to see Moira, and Moira is very surprised that Raven knows her because Moira can't remember that Raven has ever met her before. And then obviously Charles has to sort everything out. When Raven and Charles talk to each other in Charles's office, again you can see how naive and full of hope Charles is, and actually Raven's point of view makes more sense, but Charles is just not having it because he lives in his little dream world, in his bubble in the school. In the scene before, it's actually almost a little bit like a class meeting from the movie First Class. Everybody who is still alive was in this scene except of Eric, and Eric is the one they're looking for right now. When they go down to Cerebro, Hank mentions that this new version of Cerebro is blue because it's inspired by Mystique. And that is quite touching because in X-Men First Class, Hank fell in love with Mystique, but he also made perfectly clear that he was only attracted to her in her human form, not in her mutant form. But now it seems that he loves her as a person, and that's why he chose blue as the color for Cerebro. When Moira says that the FBI would kill for something like Cerebro, that might be a little nod to the movie X2, where Stryker, who isn't with the FBI but with the military, does everything in his power to get Cerebro. This scene feels a little bit awkward because three of the horsemen are just standing around Apocalypse, who's pimping them up by giving them a new armor. But you have to realize that they've only spent a couple of minutes, actually like 2-3 hours with Apocalypse so far, and they are fascinated by his power, what he can do. Now, why does Apocalypse give Angel a face tattoo? Well, first of all, the lines in Angel's face imitate the lines in Apocalypse's face. He's actually make him into a smaller version of himself. It's kind of a trademark, and it's also a symbol that the angel has fallen. And in the beginning of the movie and in the end of the movie, Angel is fighting against Nightcrawler, and Nightcrawler has tattoos or scars in his face as well. Angel and Nightcrawler are just like Charles and Apocalypse, two sides of one coin. The scars that Nightcrawler wears are symbols of angels. That's what Nightcrawler says in the movie X2. And now Nightcrawler is fighting against an angel, and the angel is wearing the scars of the devil, of Apocalypse. Magneto, on the other hand, he is not joining them because his family just died a couple of hours ago. He still mourns, and he's not interested in Apocalypse's little tricks. Eric tells Charles that just because he can see what's in his head doesn't mean he knows what's going on in his heart. And it's true, Charles is all about the head and Eric is all about the heart. He is very emotional, he can be full of love, but he can also be full of rage. In Days of the Future Past, Charles actually said he will never enter Eric's mind again, but that was in a moment when Charles was very angry with Eric. It's almost a bit of an indicator how close their friendship is, whether they allow each other to share each other's thoughts. Now, Apocalypse seems to sense that Charles is there, and it's unclear how Apocalypse's powers work. He does have some kind of psychic powers, but he can't control people's minds, but he can sense if somebody who is telepathic is actually there. I think the reason why Apocalypse is able to tap into Charles is because Charles is still connected with Eric. But maybe Apocalypse actually enters Charles's mind through Cerebro through the machine, because it's also an amplifier, and Apocalypse, is an amplifier himself. So this isn't the first time that Cerebro is being abused by other people. It's been abused by Stryker before, and I really think that Cerebro should have a better firewall. But it's also interesting that Apocalypse uses the power of Cerebro not to hurt anybody, but just to disarm humanity, just to get rid of all the nuclear weapons. And the question is that an act of war, or is that actually an act of peace? And then Apocalypse connects to many people all over the world, and he says, and it's interesting, all the weapons that he names are ancient weapons, but he is disarming nuclear weapons. But to him, those are all the same. It doesn't make a difference if it's a spear or if it's an atomic bomb. But why does Apocalypse have such a problem with weapons? Because they're not real power. He believes in survival of the strongest, the fittest, not the one who has the biggest gun. And I think it's quite possible that over his many lives, he has been a victim to people threatening him or almost killing him with weapons, especially maybe in his first lifetime when he was a mutant born amongst humans, and I'm pretty sure he was being faced with a lot of prejudice and aggression. Some people actually said that X-Men Apocalypse, the movie, wasn't as influenced by the decade that it is taking place in as First Class and Days of the Future Past. But I personally would disagree, because the nuclear weapons and the fight between the two superpowers, America or the West and the East, that was really what the 80s was politically all about, and Apocalypse just destroys that in an instant. And then Apocalypse says, you can fire your arrows from the Tower of Babel, but you can never strike God. And that again goes to show you that he was there when the Tower of Babel was built, and the people were actually fighting against him. Eric and Raven see each other for the first time in 10 years. The last time they saw each other was when Raven shot him in the neck. But you can feel that there is still a lot of love between them, and Eric is very surprised to see her in the school. He abducts Charles, which is weird because they're such close friends, so I think he believes that Apocalypse is not going to harm him at all. Havoc attacks Apocalypse, and Apocalypse says to Alex, "Everything will be revealed, my child." Revealed is the same word as in Book of Revelations, which is about the apocalypse. But what is Apocalypse talking about? Is he talking about the destruction that he is going to cause, or is he already talking about the Phoenix? I personally think he is talking about the Phoenix because he just had the vision of her when Charles and Apocalypse shared the same mind. The explosion caused by Havoc's blast is the exact same explosion that happens in Days of the Future Past when Storm sends her lightning bolts into the plane. So Quicksilver comes to the mansion looking for Charles, and he arrives just in time for the explosion. How convenient. But how does he actually know about the explosion? Did he hear the bang? That's actually not possible. The sound of the explosion travels slower than the impact that would have killed everybody at that time. He goes into the cellar, and there are no body parts flying around. There is no blood, which leads me to believe that Havoc must still be alive. Maybe his mutant power protected him from the impact. Now, the fact that the school is being blown up was already mentioned in the Deadpool movie. And in the comic books, the school is being blown up almost every year. Now, Mystique forgets to concentrate, and she's actually in her blue form when all the pupils are standing around her, and they look at her as a hero. And I wonder if they actually teach about Mystique in the school. I'm pretty sure they do, and if they do, I mean, Hank is one of the teachers. I'm sure they say that she is one of the biggest heroes they've ever had. But unfortunately, she doesn't want to be a hero, and later on in the movie we find out why. Because she feels that she didn't do enough to save all the other mutants like Emma and Azazel and Banshee from being killed. Scott realizes that his brother didn't make it out of the mansion, and there's actually a scene that is being cut out of the movie, and the scene shows Scott lifting up his glasses and blasting energy out of his eyes. Just like in the movie X2, Stryker comes with a helicopter to take people away from the school. But in this case, he doesn't take the students, he's only looking for the older ones, and he takes Moira as well. Raven remembers Stryker from back in the days in Vietnam. The question is, how did Stryker manage to come to the mansion so fast? From the point when the nuclear weapons were disarmed or started to go into space till now, approximately 15 minutes have passed. So how did he get there so fast? My theory is that Stryker has been watching the mansion all this time because he's obsessed with mutants and he's monitoring them. And when he realized that something is happening, he immediately went to the mansion to take advantage of the situation. The way that Jean hides herself and the other ones in the ruins is completely similar to how Charles hid himself and the other ones. In the helicopter we really see Jean and Scott connecting with each other, especially after Scott's brother Alex just died. And we see Nightcrawler praying just like he was praying in X2. It is actually quite important that this movie takes us back to Alkali Lake, because all the characters have such a strong connection to Alkali Lake. Jean died there. Scott lost Jean at Alkali Lake. Kurt was manipulated there in the movie X2. Wolverine came from Alkali Lake. So it just makes sense that all these characters come to Alkali Lake and go a full circle in the story. Now this scene, like so many scenes with Apocalypse in it, feels very staged. It almost feels like a theater play. And I think that is on purpose. It almost looks like a painting. The scene on the mountaintop reminded me of a scene in the Bible, where Satan takes Jesus up on a mountain and tells him that if he falls down on his knees and worships him, he will give him the whole world. Again, Charles is obviously a symbol for the good, and Apocalypse is a symbol for evil. And in this scene, Apocalypse and Charles also fight for Eric's soul, and that is one of the most important themes in the whole movie. Everything is about Eric's decisions, whether he decides to be on the good side or on the bad side. And Charles says, you can try it a different way. But Eric says, I tried your way, it doesn't work. And Apocalypse says, I've shown him a better way, a different way. It's all about Eric's decisions, which way he's taken. A lot of people said that Apocalypse doesn't feel threatening. And I agree, he doesn't, and he doesn't want to. He's playing with people, he's tempting people, he convinces people. He doesn't need to threaten them. That's the amazing thing about Oscar Isaac's performance. He's not threatening, he's scary in a different way. Apocalypse forces Charles to deliver a message to the whole world, and in this message he practically says that the strong will inherit the earth, which obviously is the complete opposite of what is being taught in the New Testament, that the meek shall inherit the earth. Charles is delivering the message, but he changes the end of the message, and he says that the ones with power should protect the ones that don't have power. Apocalypse, he isn't even angry, he just looks at Charles with disappointment. He is so powerful that he doesn't really care if people do what he says. And I love these little reactions, and I love the way that Oscar Isaac portrays Apocalypse in the movie. And another detail that I really appreciate in the movie is that every person hears what Apocalypse is saying, but in their own language. And when Charles is speaking to people in Hebrew, he is mentioning that the temples are going to be destroyed, and that is actually a sign of the apocalypse. Scott thinks that Wolverine is actually a wild animal, and he's almost right, because Logan has been living in a virtual reality for quite some time. That's why he's wearing this helmet. And in this virtual reality he had to kill people over and over again. The costume Wolverine is wearing is absolutely accurate. It's just the same as in the comic books, with one exception. In the comic books he's not wearing trousers, he's actually naked. When Jean gives Logan back a little bit of his memory, it's a first connection between these two characters, and it explains why they are always so drawn to each other. But it's also a great connection to the first X-Men movie, which plays approximately 15 years after X-Men Apocalypse. And in this movie, Professor Xavier actually says to Logan, it's been 15 years since you started looking for your past. You can already tell that Scott Summers doesn't really like Logan. And when he says that's the last thing we see of this guy, it's a sad inside joke about the fact that Hugh Jackman is not reprising his role as Wolverine in an X-Men movie. Now Apocalypse builds a new pyramid, a new temple. He's building himself a monument. Scott again is a good leader, and he shows the other guys how to get away from Alkali Lake. He found a plane, and he also found suits that they could wear. There is actually a scene in the first X-Men movie where Wolverine stands in front of showcases with uniforms inside, and they look exactly the same way as in X-Men Apocalypse. And here is another scene that might feel a bit unnecessary, but it's full of symbolism. It's the scene where Magneto gets his new helmet. Why is that important? Well, in First Class, he puts on the helmet just before he kills Sebastian Shaw. And the helmet is actually from Sebastian, who was the bad guy. So in this moment, he took the negativity from Sebastian Shaw over to himself. He made a choice to kill again. The helmet is a symbol of him being Magneto and not Eric anymore. It's a symbol of being disconnected from Charles, his best friend, and his positive side. And again, Apocalypse and Charles fight for his soul, and in this very moment, Apocalypse has the stronger hand. This scene is a repetition of the scene we see in First Class when they fly to Cuba. All the X-Men sitting in the plane, and Raven even mentions that. She mentions that she was afraid back then. And she has to be a hero now, but she can't be. She feels that she's not strong enough to be the hero that everybody else sees in her. But then Jean, Scott, Kurt, and Peter tell her that she has actually changed their life and influenced their life. Raven's or Mystique's role in this movie is much bigger than most people think. But it's an emotional impact that she has on everybody that's around her. Now Eric is altering the planet's magnetic field. And when he does this, it causes global destruction. But just like in the scene when he killed the policeman, he doesn't look at it. He ignores it. He just does what he thinks he has to do. And he's almost in a state of meditation. And we see two really interesting scenes. We see a shipwreck on the bottom of the ocean being lifted. And I'm almost 100% sure that this is the shipwreck from X-Men First Class. And in the next scene, we see containers being lifted up in the air. And in Days of the Future Past, the Sentinels were in very, very similar containers. And I think that Bryan Singer tries to connect these movies together, which is absolutely beautiful, but nobody really notices it. Apocalypse actually admits that he has a weakness. His weakness is that he can't control everyone. He can't get into people's minds and control them. That's why he needs Charles. And that is the weakness of all dictators. They can't control our minds unless they have a very strong system in place that can control everyone. They are weak. And Apocalypse doesn't like systems because they have failed him before. Last time he was betrayed. Raven finally changes into Mystique and accepts that she has to be the hero for the mutant community. Now bear in mind that all these mutants are untrained. They are just normal kids. They don't really know what they do. Mystique and Quicksilver go to Eric and talk to him while the other X-Men are fighting against the Horsemen. When Raven and Peter talk to Magneto, it's all about family, but that's what fueled his rage. But she tells him, you have lost 2 families, but you still have family. You have me, you have Charles, who are actually not his family, but it's the family he chose. It's his friends, and that's what the X-Men are all about. The X-Men are a family. Jean and Nightcrawler work together to find Professor Xavier. Nightcrawler goes into the pyramid looking for him, while Jean is hiding. She's afraid to really use any powers but a little bit of telepathy. The fact that she is actually being portrayed as quite weak in this stage makes it even more powerful when she accepts that she is the Phoenix. It's interesting to see Cyclops and Storm fighting against each other because they both were leaders of the X-Men in the comic books. And in the 80s, Storm was actually fighting against Cyclops to become the leader of the X-Men. You can tell that Cyclops is very unexperienced, he can't control his powers, and he doesn't have a fighting style. He has never been trained to fight against anybody, and you can tell. Storm, on the other side, is afraid to use her powers. She's unsure if she's actually doing the right thing. And at times, especially when the car comes towards her, she's terrified. She doesn't really know what she's doing. Her fighting style is the most advanced one because she is an assassin, she is a ninja, she is trained, she is the only one who really enjoys fighting. But she plays with Beast, she doesn't try to kill him, she enjoys the challenge, she smirks when they fight against each other. At one point I think she would have killed him, but she's like a cat playing with a mouse. Hank's fighting style is more advanced than in the last 2 movies, but he's still very far of having the agility that he has in the comic books. So I hope once they start training in the Danger Room, he's gonna get better and better. But you can already see that he's much stronger than in the last movie. He actually can lift a car this time. Their fight is a continuation of the cage fight from the beginning of the movie. And in the beginning, the announcer says, "Who's better to fight against an angel than the devil?" So this is again the religious theme that goes all the way through the movie. But the devil actually is fighting on the good side and the angel on the bad side. But it doesn't look to me as if Angel is really trying to kill Nightcrawler. He just tries to stop him from getting to Apocalypse. All the horsemen are still themselves. They are not mind controlled. They are just convinced to serve Apocalypse. And Nightcrawler, being a religious person, tries to beat Archangel without actually hurting him, so he teleports him into a cage again. Nightcrawler finally finds Charles Xavier, who is bald now. And when he teleports them away, we get a little glimpse of the so-called Brimstone dimension. That's the dimension that Kurt teleports through when he does his teleportation. Now, Archangel and Psylocke attack the plane, and by the way they work together, you can tell that they know each other and they have a history together. Angel cuts a hole into the plane. In the movie X2, there is a missile hitting the plane of the X-Men. Now Mystique tells Eric that she's gonna go to fight for what she has left. This decision changes the outcome of the whole movie. And now we see a flashback scene. We see Eric remembers a scene from First Class. It's the first time that he realized that he doesn't have to be alone. that he doesn't have to fight all by himself. It's a very important scene, and it also shows that one of the big themes of the movie is working together, not being alone, being a family. For the first time in the movie, we see an Apocalypse who is slightly pissed off and angry, but he's still very self-controlled. He's searching for Charles, and he tells Charles that they are both connected. In movies with people with superpowers, it's always a problem if there are some people that are just too powerful. And Quicksilver is one of them. He is so fast that he can solve every problem almost instantaneously. Just like in Days of Future Past, Mystique steps forward, disguised as somebody else, to save everybody. She attacks Apocalypse even though she knows that she probably is going to die because he's so powerful. When Apocalypse realizes that this big hero, Mystique, is just a weak woman, he's absolutely surprised, and he can't believe that everybody's looking up to this weak person. But her making the sacrifice again influences everybody in this scene. Storm sees her big hero, and she realizes that she fights on the wrong side. Scott and Hank, they see that they have to do something, and Charles realizes he has to go into Apocalypse's mind to fight him there. It's really Mystique's strength and her sacrifice that in the end destroys Apocalypse, or where everybody starts to really fight against him, even though he's so powerful. The fight between Apocalypse and Charles in the psychic realm is one of the greatest scenes of the movie. And the fact that Charles' mind is actually the mansion goes to show you how important this place is to him. This is his dream, this is his life. But Apocalypse shows for the first time in the movie his size-changing abilities. I'm glad that he didn't use the power in the real world, because it would be a little bit too much over the top, too unbelievable. And I like the fact that Apocalypse was a smaller person, and he was intimidating because of his presence and his powers, not because he was taller than everybody else. It's scary to see that the most powerful psychic in the world doesn't stand a chance against Apocalypse, even in the psychic realm. When Eric sees Mystique being strangled by Apocalypse, he realizes that he has to fight for his real family. He turns against Apocalypse, creating a huge X in front of him. Apocalypse is absolutely shocked that Eric betrays him. He doesn't understand the concept of love. He doesn't understand the concept of family and loyalty. The only concept he understands is the concept of power, and because he's the most powerful one, he thinks everybody should follow him, and he doesn't understand why people would turn against him. Now Scott joins the fight as well, and it's brilliant that he still can't control his powers. He doesn't act like one of the Avengers, for example. They are trained to fight. These young X-Men, they don't know how to fight. And when he takes off his glasses, the first blast actually pushes him back, and he has to focus to find Apocalypse. He knows they can't harm him. He waits till they're out of ammunition, and then he strikes. And as soon as Scott can't fire anymore, Apocalypse manipulates Sans to take him into a wall. But he doesn't kill Cyclops. He doesn't even try to kill Cyclops. And why would he? He believes in the powerful, and Cyclops is one of the most powerful mutants. So Apocalypse actually respects him for that. I have to say, the whole fight sequence to me feels very realistic. Everyone tries their best to do what they can. Hank, for example, he can only help the other ones. He's not powerful enough to actually attack Apocalypse. He tries it once and realizes it doesn't work. Some people actually said that the whole fight scene was too static because Magneto is just hovering in the air and throwing metal against him, but I actually really enjoyed that. I don't need another fight scene like in Age of Ultron where you can't actually follow what's happening. I liked this more quiet take on the fight. So this is another one of these scenes, just like Eric sitting next to his daughter and Charles sitting next to Jean. Jean now is sitting next to Charles, taking care of him, caring for him. And this is this ongoing theme that you have to take care of each other, feeling love and helping each other. And Charles really does need help. He calls out for Jean, but she is so afraid of using her powers, she's so insecure that it takes a very long time for her to actually entering his mind. Jean finally enters Charles's mind, and in this moment, Charles says to Apocalypse, "You can never win because you are alone and I am not." This is the message of the whole movie. You have to fight together. Be a family. Be close to your friends. Help each other. That's the whole message of the X-Men. Working together as a team, as a family. When Jean unleashes her true power, her full potential, it's no problem for her to kick Apocalypse out of Charles's mind. That just goes to show you how strong she truly is. And then she continues to fight him in the real life. She walks towards him, and then what we've all been waiting for, the flaming bird appears behind her and she unleashes the Phoenix. Just like in X-Men The Last Stand, she disintegrates Apocalypse. He's taking him apart on a molecular level. And because Apocalypse has the same powers as Wolverine, he can heal, just like Wolverine in The Last Stand. But he can only do this so long, so he tries to teleport away. But Storm, who realized that she was working on the wrong side, betrays Apocalypse and keeps him there with one of her lightning bolts. And just before Jean completely destroys Apocalypse, he says, almost in a peaceful and calm way, "All is revealed." And I'm 100% sure that he's talking about the Phoenix. Apocalypse believes in survival of the fittest, and he is not the fittest. The Phoenix is stronger than him, and he is okay with giving way for someone who's stronger than him, somebody who will cleanse the earth. In an earlier scene, Apocalypse says, "From the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one." And then we also have, like Phoenix from the ashes. The Phoenix and Apocalypse have more in common than we think. They both want to destroy just to start something new. Another thing I realized is that Jean completely changes her personality when she becomes the Phoenix in this movie. Before, she was afraid, she was timid, she was hiding. And once she reveals her power, she walks straight towards Apocalypse. And when she spreads her arms and the Firebird appears behind her, it seems that she's no longer in control. She just lets nature take over, let the Phoenix take over. That's a bit scary because we all know what that's gonna lead to. We see Charles laying in Moira's arms, just like he was laying in her arms in first class. But then Jean comes and says he is still alive, and she brings him back to life. Just a moment ago, the Phoenix was destruction, and now she's bringing life. He sacrificed his happiness for his dream, for the school, but now he realizes that that probably was the wrong way to go. He took something away from her because he thought that was the best for her. But she has to make the choices, and Charles just realized that. In Days of the Future Past, Charles also realized that he couldn't control Raven, that she had to make her own decisions. It must be difficult for somebody who can control minds not to control the minds of others and let them do what they choose to do. When Jean and Eric rebuild the school, it's a moment of hope. It's a moment of absolute positivity that even the biggest crimes can be forgiven. That's a scene of hope. Storm is there. She was a horseman. Eric was a horseman. But now they're working together to rebuild what has been destroyed. They help to rebuild Charles's dream. And Charles's dream is hope. Hope for the future. Maybe some people thought this ending was a little bit too cheesy, too positive, but it had to be a positive ending to stand against the destruction of Apocalypse. Now we see the very first version of the Danger Room. We've seen the Danger Room before in X-Men The Last Stand, but this is the original version that doesn't work with holograms yet. Instead, it works with the Sentinels from X-Men Days of Future Past. Does that mean that Sentinels are still around? Or did Charles actually get the Sentinels from the President? We also see the first real team of X-Men, and they are all wearing the original costumes that they are wearing in the 90s comics. For the very first time, we are actually really seeing a full team of X-Men. Mystique decided to stay. She accepted her role as a hero, as a leader, and as a mutant. She is showing her true colors, and she trains the new X-Men. Their conversation is all based around hope. Eric is afraid that humans will start to hunt mutants again. But Charles has hope. And he says, I had hope in you, I had hope in Mystique, and I was right. And this leads us back to one of the first scenes in the first X-Men movie. Eric asks Charles, what are you looking for? And Charles answers, hope. And if that wasn't enough, we actually get a new version of the famous conversation between the two of them. Doesn't it wake you up in the middle of the night? This is a beautiful ending of two trilogies, all brought together, even though the first trilogy is not even in the same timeline anymore. But in Days of Future Past, Hank says that there is a theory that the time stream always corrects itself. The end credit scene obviously is an Easter egg for Nathaniel Essex, also known as Mr. Sinister. And Mr. Sinister, he's a geneticist, obsessed with mutants, especially with the Summers family. The blood he took from the Weapon X facility was Wolverine's blood. So it's more than possible that he's gonna try to clone Wolverine. And we all know that the clone of Wolverine is X-23, or Laura. But maybe Mr. Sinister doesn't stop there. In Cairo, there's still the body of Archangel. Maybe he takes his genetic code and creates a new child, a new angel. Maybe he sells the DNA to the Worthingtons, and they gonna have Angel as their child. In the comic books, Mr. Sinister also has a strong connection to Apocalypse. And is it possible that Mr. Sinister finds DNA of Apocalypse and tries to bring him back? I guess we'll have to wait till the next movie. Essex also helped creating a child called Nate Gray, who grows up to become Cable. And Cable is the best friend of Deadpool. And we've already heard that Cable will be in the next Deadpool movie. So maybe there is a connection between the X-Men universe and the Deadpool series. Whew! That was one long analysis. Thank you so much for watching it all the way to the end. I put a lot of work into this analysis. I worked on it 3 weeks, watched the movie 3 times, and tried to find every single detail in the movie. I'm sure I still missed something. If I have missed something, please leave a comment below. And share this video, especially with X-Men fans and people that did enjoy the movie already. But you can also share it with people that didn't like the movie. Maybe they didn't appreciate it enough because they didn't see all these details. And if one of you guys out there watching actually helped creating the movie X-Men Apocalypse, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. This movie made me feel exactly the same way I felt when I watched the very first X-Men movie. I felt like a child again, like the first time I've ever read an X-Men comic book. And that's the biggest achievement that you can have when you create an X-Men movie. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.